It is May 20th. It's hot. I'm in a sweatshirt. My air conditioner is blasted. And we're going to keep making our way through the each and every one of the NFL divisions around the NFL. Jarrett Bailey with you. As always, thank you for tuning into the Pump Fake, whether you're watching on YouTube, on Twitter, listening to it wherever you get your podcast. Always grateful to be part of your day. And joining me to talk about the NFC East today is Jess Navarez. Hi, Jess. How are you?
Hello, I'm doing good, but like you said, it is hot, and it's only
Yes.
getting hotter, especially here in Texas. If you know, you know. It's a little miserable with the weather, but what's not miserable is the fact that OTAs are just around the corner. So that gives me some hope that we can withstand the heat because we are one step closer to football season.
Absolutely. And OTAs, mini camp, and then we have that like little month break in between, and then training camp, obviously, at the tail end of July. So it's coming. It's coming very quickly, phrasing. And OTAs kicking off this week. We talked about the AFC East last week with Taylor Kyles. We're going to be talking about the NFC East today. And Jess, we'll start off with your Dallas Cowboys. I'll give you my quick thoughts on them as a whole. So each year I do 2 iterations of going game by game for every team and picking, each game, division standings, all that fun stuff. I did my first iteration this past week. And, looking at Dallas, I don't know how you feel, but personally from, an outsider, I guess, if you want to call me that, someone who's not, around the team every day, there just seems to be a lot of noise and not a lot of great noise where the main focus is, okay, are they going to pay Dak? Are they going to pay CeeDee Lamb? Are they going to pay Micah Parsons? Wow, they've made no moves whatsoever to make this team better after getting eliminated, not just eliminated in the wild card round, really just blown out in the wild card round by the Packers. Their biggest move of note has been bringing back Ezekiel Elliott, which, if this was 2016, that's awesome. But unfortunately, it's 2024. This roster just feels very top heavy to me, where the stars are certainly there. But outside of that, there isn't a ton for me to love about Dallas. And it feels like this could be Mike McCarthy somewhat as a lame duck coach, where a lot of people thought, okay, they're going to move on from McCarthy in this offseason. They don't. I don't know. My perspective is that this could be a year where there's too much outside noise and the ceiling just kind of caves in on the Cowboys.
There was a shift. I will say there was a shift after the playoff loss to the Packers. I mean, let's call it what it is. That was the Cowboys' most embarrassing playoff loss yet. We're not going to sugarcoat it, and they don't either. And that's, I think, the important thing is they understand that game was a game that they should have gone in there to win. Especially with the roster they had last year, it was just a game they should have won. And so there was a shift. There was a shift within really everybody. And I think what you're seeing now is Jerry Jones went on at the beginning of the offseason to say that they were going all in. And everybody kind of sunk their claws into this phrase, the all-in phrase. And if you're a Cowboys fan and you're listening to this, you understand how much you hear the phrase all in. You just want to hit your head in a wall because it's just like you're sick of hearing it at this point. And the thing is I didn't understand then why people were so adamant about listening to this phrase by Jerry, because he says it every offseason, right? And so for me personally, I thought, okay, what does all in mean for this Cowboys front office in general? And you look at last offseason, what did they do? They acquired Brandon Cooks via trade, Stephon Gilmore. That was their version of all in. So in my mind, I'm like, okay, well, let's see how this kind of swings and let's see where this goes. Nothing really has happened. It's been a very quiet offseason, but what you did see is the Cowboys drafting for needs in position groups. And so, yes, they haven't acquired any really big free agents other than Zeke, but they did use the draft to the best advantage that they could. They got a very solid group of a draft class. I'm talking a very mature group, which I think is very rare when you get a group of guys who potentially could all be ready to be starters depending on how the cards fall for them with their training camp battles, how hard they want to practice, and all of that. And so for me, I think, yes, you would want to see more as far as, acquiring players via trades when they had the opportunity or getting the splash free agents. However, you can't do that when, guess what? There's no money. There's not money right now for the Cowboys to be spending because, yeah, they haven't re-signed Dak Prescott. And honestly, we don't really know where that's going to lie. We don't know if Jerry Jones is going to have kind of this one last chance mentality for Dak, for the coaching staff, for McCarthy, who's also on the last year of his contract as well. So there's a lot of unknowns right now. And I think until that contract gets signed, you can't see other contracts get signed. You can't see CeeDee Lamb get his long-term, well-deserved deal. You can't see the same for Micah Parsons. And me personally, I just think this should have happened last year. I think you knew that this was happening, and now you're in a hole because guess what? You owe Dak Prescott more money than you would have last year because of his phenomenal MVP-like season.
Yeah.
So they've kind of put themselves in a hole, and now it's either, hey, you let him play on essentially a one-year deal, right? Last year of his contract, and kind of have that mentality throughout the entire coaching staff as well when you have Mike McCarthy doing the same thing, or you sign him, you kind of go from there. You have to keep in mind his age. He's not getting any older. But for me personally, sign Dak Prescott. Oh my goodness, I will die on this hill. Like this just needs to happen because really you don't have another option right now. Yeah. You didn't draft a backup quarterback. You have Trey Lance and Cooper Rush, who I think are going to have a phenomenal training camp backup QB battle. But other than that, you don't really know what you have in Trey Lance. You haven't gotten to see him. He was using all last year to play catch up. And Scott Tolzien, the Cowboys quarterbacks coach, just talked about that last week, how last year was a game of catch up. And that's really all it was. You don't know what Trey Lance has. You can't sit there, and for the Cowboys fans that sit there and like, oh, we have Trey Lance. If something happens to Dak, you don't know that. You don't know that yet. You haven't seen him. Nobody has seen what he has yet. And, I'd like to believe that Trey Lance is improved, but we don't know yet. So long story short, we don't know yet either over here in Dallas. We don't know exactly what this team is going to shape up to be. Your running back room is going to look different. Your defensive line, your offensive line, there's so many moving parts and so many question marks that honestly, until we see them on the field, really starting OTAs, minicamp, especially training camp, we don't know, especially when two of your key parts of your offensive line are no longer there anymore with your center and Tyler Bionish and your left tackle with Tyron Smith, who – God, I cannot believe he's going to be wearing green and protecting. Insane. You don't know what that O-line is going to look like. So there's a lot of question marks, and I don't blame anybody for not having the belief for, getting in that repeat toxic cycle that we usually go into of like, oh man, we don't believe. Oh, something happens, we believe again. And then it all repeats itself. We don't know right now. And I honestly don't think we're going to know until we get closer to training camp.
In terms of the loss of Dan Quinn, defensive coordinator, who's now over in Washington, staying within the division as the Commanders head coach, and you pointed out he took half of the Cowboys roster with him. It seems several free agents just following him to Washington. How big of a loss is that going to be for the Cowboys defense?
I think with Dan Quinn, he was just such a staple of that defense, and I'm talking not even just what you saw as a coach. The guys respect Dan so much. I mean, you talk to the guys in the locker room, and Dan was just so well respected and well heard, and most of all, well reciprocated in the locker room. So I think that is a really big part of why you see these free agents following Dan to Washington, because they know the kind of culture he creates and his coaching style and all of that. But I mean, I do think at some point, there had to be some kind of change. And I think what you were seeing with the Cowboys defense last year, and it's starting to come out a little bit more now, is maybe players weren't put in the correct position to play up to their skill set. Example, Mozzie Smith. It's just crazy how you look at the guy lost 30 pounds last year. And trying to play him is more DE than anything else, when that's not what Mozzie does, right? Mozzie's a run stopper. He goes up the middle. That's what his bread and butter was in college. And so
that's what he was drafted to do.
Exactly. And that's not what it seemed like Dan was trying to do with him. And so it's interesting, though. We'll never know what Dan's vision was for Mozzie, but this coaching staff that came in now talked about, Mike Zimmer, Cowboys' newest defensive coordinator, came in to say, what we have to do with Mozzie is first, he has to recover. He had a shoulder surgery in this offseason. He has to recover, go back to the fundamentals, and we're going to get him back to where he's comfortable as far as weight. And then we go from there. So for me, yes, you're going to miss Dan Quinn because you're used to it, right? You're comfortable. It's something you know. And Mike Zimmer, he's a bit of a hard, you know what? He is
A hard ass. Yeah. No, you can, don't worry. You can swear in this podcast. Yeah.
Well, I'm just saying he has a reputation for being very tough nosed and gonna call you out on like it is, and he has done that already from what I've heard. Mike Zimmer hasn't fully come out yet, but it will eventually, and that's okay. That's what he's there for. He's there to draw the line. So I think what you're going to see is the shift in Dan Quinn, who is very, I'll say uncle-like to these guys, to a Mike Zimmer who's very like, nope, I'm not your friend. I'm your coach. We're going to be here. We're going to win. And it's just going to be a little bit different of a mentality. But I will give Zimmer credit that a lot of people, think he's too tough and too rugged. He does care about these guys. The way he talked about Mozzie and talking about even just taking care of his mental health and all of that was important. So I will give Zim that credit, but it is going to be different. It doesn't mean it's going to be worse or better. We don't necessarily know that yet either, but it's going to be different. And how could it not be? Dan Quinn was a staple. He was in talks of, hey, if Mike McCarthy leaves, he could be your head coach.
Right.
When you lose a guy like that, it is going to be different, and especially when you're almost talking about night and day with Dan and Mike as far as their personalities. But I don't necessarily think the Cowboys are worse off with Zim. I do think if somebody could come in and kind of straighten things up, it is going to be Mike Zimmer.
If you had to bet right now, are the Cowboys a playoff team, and is Dak Prescott a Cowboy in 2025?
Oh, he better well be. Oh my goodness. I do think so. And I'm not just saying that because I'm here and I'm covering the team. I'm not just saying that. I do absolutely think this draft class, had they not drafted so well, I would have said otherwise. But this draft class came in, and I tweeted about this a while back saying one word I would describe them is maturity. And this draft class ability to kind of be plug and play players. Yes, they need polishing. Yes, they need, to adjust to the playbook and learn everything. But you're talking about a draft class that is comprised of a guy like Tyler Guyton, who the Cowboys drafted in the first round. He moved to Dallas 2 days after the draft to come and start learning and working with Duke Mayweather at O-line. Oh my goodness. Now it's not coming to my head. O-line coach, fantastic. If you don't know Duke, please Google him. I'm not doing justice by explaining it right now. But to start training, essentially, and training with people that he knew were going to get him better. So when you have guys like that 2 days after the draft, not 2 weeks, because there was a 2-week gap to which things started after the draft, 2 days he was over here. So for me, if you have guys that are ready, willing, able to work, and they want to, that helps your team out significantly. And as far as Dak, look, he better be a Cowboy in 2025 because I don't know who the heck else would step in his position to play at quarterback, especially when everything has been built around Dak Prescott. Mike McCarthy's West Coast offense that he started implementing last year, it was built for Dak. And I find it no coincidence that Dak was so successful under it as soon as Kellen was gone, because again, things needed to change. They weren't working for Dak specifically as a quarterback when Kellen was the offensive coordinator. We'll talk about Kellen and how he also decided to stay in the NFC East. But,
right.
I do think it would be so foolish for this franchise if they want to win a championship or even get close to it. They need Dak Prescott, where they're going to be waiting probably another 30 years to do so by starting over with a quarterback again. You just don't have the time to do that, nor do you have the guys. You don't have the guys that are ready to step in and do that yet. So I also like to point out, too, the Cowboys have significant luck when it comes to their previous history with quarterbacks. They have the guys that your Tony Romos and your Dak Prescotts that got there really by sheer luck. So this time you can't ensure you're going to be lucky. You have to start finding that guy, training him under Dak Prescott if you want to be successful. You can't just always count on your luck to find you your next franchise quarterback. And so for me, look, it's a huge mistake if the Cowboys do not lock down Dak Prescott past the season.
Time will tell with the Dallas Cowboys. We'll shift to the Philadelphia Eagles, the team that I have slated to win the NFC East this season. The colossal just collapse at the end of the 2023 season did the Philadelphia Eagles have. They come in completely revamped on both sides of the ball in terms of coaching staff, where Kellen Moore comes over from Dallas to be the offensive coordinator. Vic Fangio comes over from Miami to be the defensive coordinator. They draft Quinion Mitchell. They draft Cooper DeJean. They bring over Bryce Huff. They've got a lot of upgrade now. They do lose Hassan Reddick, but bringing in Huff, I mean, that kind of cancels each other out. They take care of their guys by extending AJ Brown, making sure that they pay Devontae Smith, and obviously the acquisition of Saquon Barkley. This is a team where on paper you look at them and say, okay, they should be amongst the best teams in the NFC. But how is this coaching situation going to work? Is it going to be, something where Sirianni and Fangio and Moore all work together like a cohesive unit, or are we talking about them as the Three Stooges by week 11? Like it's very, two different things that you could really look at. And we'll see how it happens. I kind of lean toward the former, where it's got to work, really, because there was talks about, like, last year, they're like, are they going to fire Nick Sirianni after this season? Yeah. So we're going to find out. But in terms of Philadelphia, where's your head on the Eagles, right? Like I said, right now I have them slated to win the division, but time will tell. If the Cowboys win it, it'll be the first time that a team has repeated as NFC East champion since 03-04, and the Eagles last did it.
I will never count out Jalen Hurts. I think when you have a guy like Jalen Hurts, how can you? And he has shown to be a franchise quarterback time and time again. However, what was interesting to me about the Eagles last year is I just had a feeling. I just knew they were getting too hot too soon. Sirianni was getting his head a little too big. And I was like, this team is going to fall apart right when the Cowboys needed to. And look what happened, right? But then the Cowboys didn't do themselves a favor, and we know how that story ends. But I think as far as the Eagles, Kellen Moore was such an interesting hire. Look, I am not going to hate on Kellen Moore whatsoever. I got the honor to cover the team when Kellen was there and ask him questions and do all of that. I grew up a Cowboys fan. I knew him as a quarterback, right? The thing is I'm interested to see how Kellen's playbook is going to fit a mobile quarterback like Jalen Hurts. I struggle with that in my brain a little bit. I struggle with understanding how those two things are going to collide. So I don't know. Maybe it'll shock me. I just don't know how Kellen is going to help Jalen become better, right? I think Jalen can be Jalen all on his own. I just don't know how this playbook can benefit him to be better and ensure that he continues to win. As far as Sirianni, honestly, it's his prove it year. It is his prove it year too, because this Cowboys, oh my goodness, this Eagles team cannot afford to lose. They can't afford to lose. They have all of the right pieces. They drafted well. They have a solid draft class. And like you said, they had some splash free agency moves. They cannot afford to lose this year. And if they do, it might be a rebuild year. So honestly, I never count the Eagles out. I think as long as you have Jalen Hurts and Dak Prescott going at it, those will be the determining factors of their seasons. I think whoever wins the first game between the two is who takes the division. I think it always comes down to those games that determine your playoff seeding and who wins that division. So look, they have to win it. They have to win it. Or guess what? The Cowboys are that much closer behind them. So it's one of those seasons where I think it's a prove it year for Sirianni and his staff as well.
Yeah, and my thought process is this, and obviously a lot of dominoes will have to fall to get to this point. But if they do, trip at the finish line, or if they're an early round playoff exit again, I mean, there's a perfectly good Mike Vrabel who's currently in Cleveland as, whatever the hell his position is, like senior consultant, I think is what they gave him as the title. Where like, hey, that's going to be a conversation that's going to be had. There's going to be a perfectly good Ben Johnson whose name is going to pop up in the coaching cycle again, where, if you're Philadelphia, you're saying, okay, yeah, bring in Ben Johnson and bring to put with Jalen Hurts there. We could certainly do worse. So there will be conversations if it's a one and done in the playoffs again with Philadelphia. And it's certainly intriguing. We have a YouTube comment. Do we think the Eagles' late fall was partially due to their Super Bowl hangover? They just seem mentally drained by week 12.
No, honestly, I do think Jalen Hurts was struggling with injuries more than we know. I think that had a lot to do with it, but I also like I said, I just think they got too hot too quick. And you see this progression of teams throughout the season where, yes, it's clicking, it's working, but then you almost have this like ability to overthink how well things are going for you, and it starts to crumble a little bit. And I think that's exactly what happened with them. There was nothing that went wrong. There was nothing going against them. I don't think it was a Super Bowl hangover, because look how hot they started their season. But honestly, it doesn't matter if you cannot continue to win in the playoffs. So look, covering the Cowboys, I can say that it doesn't matter how successful your season was, but we'll see. I don't count them out.
The thing with the Eagles for me last year, though, is like, yeah, the record looked good, but they just felt off to me all year in some ways. Like, even going back to the early, what was that, a Monday night or Thursday night against Minnesota, a game that they won, but they had like 4 turnovers. They just kept, they like, dude, hold on to the ball. You win this game by 3 scores. And it was kind of like that all year. And eventually they play the Jets, where Jalen Hurts has a really bad game, throws a bunch of picks. They lose to a bad Jets team. I should say a bad Jets offense. The defense has obviously been fantastic, right. But, you know, a Jets team that was, you know, under the tutelage of Zach Wilson. So they had those hiccups throughout the year offensively where, you know, you could see the glimmers of what it was from 2022, but in 2023, they just never seemed to get everything together. Now, you know, you bring in a guy like Barkley, and you extend your weapons with Smith and AJ Brown. I am intrigued by the Kellen Moore hiring as well, because we saw what it did last year for Justin Herbert, and the answer was not much. I think there's some similarities with Herbert and Hurts, where they're both very, very good downfield vertical throwers, and a Kellen Moore offense doesn't really take a ton of advantage of that. So I'm intrigued.
Hurts' interceptions. Let's not forget what a problem that was in Dallas under Kellen Moore.
Yeah,
people like to blame that on Dak, but when you really went back and you looked at every single interception, it was a lot of miscues and miscommunications within the offense. Guess who that falls under? That didn't fall under Dak. That fell under your offensive coordinator at the time, which was Kellen Moore. So for me, if there's already those miscues and miscommunications that were happening last season without Kellen Moore, I think what Kellen has a knack of doing is kind of overwhelming your offense and saying, like, we could do this or this or this or this and this and this, to where it's like they just don't know where they're going to a point. So I really hope that he has learned since his time in Dallas how to kind of manage that, because look, there could be something brewing there with the interception problem in Philly if they don't watch out.
And by the way, Dak said going into last year, I'm not going to throw 10 picks, and he cleaned it up, and he led the NFL in touchdown passes. So I think
love it.
I think that you could be onto something there. Let's move on to the Commanders. When I went game by game, I only gave them 4 wins, and I circled them as like, okay, that's a team when I do this for the second time, I'm sure they're going to have more than 4. I don't think they're going to be a playoff team, but I think 6, 7 maybe could be what they hover around. I like a lot of their moves, especially on the offensive line, bringing over like we talked about already, multiple Dallas Cowboys coming over to help out the offensive line. They bring over Frankie Lulu, the linebacker from Carolina. They signed Bobby Wagner, Jeremy Chin. Like, they're bringing in a bunch of like solid veterans that I think will fit Dan Quinn's defense very well. I think the biggest setback that I have with Washington is, having a rookie quarterback, and a rookie quarterback that I feel like I've seen Jayden Daniels in Washington before, and it's called Robert Griffin, where I'm just like, dude, the way that you play, like, you're gonna, can you stay healthy? Are you gonna be able to make this sustainable? So I am worried about that, and I don't know how I necessarily feel about Jayden Daniels at this level. But the rest of the roster I really like, but it's very much a foundation laying year for Washington, where I could see them be a fun 6-win team.
I will not count Dan Quinn out. I just cannot. And not only that, it's hard to count him out when he took a lot of the Cowboys free agents. I mean, you go down the list and it's just kind of comical at this point. Anytime there's a free agent left, you're like, oh, he's probably going to go to Washington,
right?
With Dan. But he also took a lot of the coaching staff as well, successful coaching staff under the Cowboys. And so you have to understand that a lot of the success that the Cowboys had last year could be carried over into this Washington team overall, because Dan has the right people in place. And not only that, Dan is notorious for having people follow him through his coaching career, right? Whether it be from Atlanta to Seattle to the Cowboys, now to the Commanders. he has a way of getting people to buy into what he's doing here. And that is just, it's such a special part of Dan's game. And, it's almost like Dan treats these guys like his own kids. And they've said that. Like, I feel like he's a father figure to me. You play harder for a coach that is giving you so much of himself. And the way Dan does it is just so personal. And God, I just have so much respect for Dan. So I'm not going to count them out. I will say, yeah, you're going to have hiccups with the rookie quarterback. It's just inevitable. And you know what? You might not even see it this year. It could be a year 2 thing that you see like the beginner's luck phase, and then year 2 comes and things kind of start to set in. So I'm going to keep an eye on that. But I do think that Dan is setting up all the right moves here. Whether or not this year or next year, I think within the next 3 or 4 years, you could see a very, very good Commanders team that just continues to get better and grow. Because, yeah, what he sets this year, look, I already think it's going to be better than what people are expecting. It's only going to go up from there. So I have faith in Dan Quinn as a head coach. I'm all for it for him. I just really wish he wasn't in the same division as the Cowboys. It's disheartening to know that guys that know your system so well can go in and play you twice a year. That could be a disadvantage, especially when you're talking in terms of, playoff seeding and everything like that matters later in the season. But I don't count him out. I really don't. I have too much respect for Dan, and I've seen the impact he has on players to count him out on anything, especially working with a rookie quarterback. Oh my goodness. It's going to be something.
What do we think about the hiring of Cliff Kingsbury to be running the offense? Cliff obviously having stops in Arizona as their head coach before going to USC, and now being in Washington with Jayden Daniels. What do we think that this is going to look like offensively for the Commanders with Jayden Daniels, Jahan Dotson, Terry McLaurin? Like they've got the names, they got the weapons. It's just how is this all going to fit?
I think we have yet to find out. Under Dan Quinn, here's the thing. You just don't know, because he likes to leave a lot of mystery and a lot of sight left unseen until he has to pull it out of his pocket. And so I think even what you're going to see early on isn't going to actually be what the Commanders have up their sleeves, week 12, week 13. I don't think it's fair to say yet. However, I do think they're setting up for one heck of a passing game. Goodness gracious.
Sure.
Oh my goodness. It scares me. It scares me for the long term of this team, how good that they can get, especially if that passing game can get established quickly.
All right, well, we'll move on to the New York Giants, where I think that the Giants are going to be the worst team in football this season. I think they'll hold the number 1 overall pick in the 2025 NFL draft.
That's a positive, right?
Sure, yeah. If they actually decide to take a quarterback this time around rather than going to year 7 of Daniel Jones and really try to figure out what they have, that's the biggest thing for me is like, what else do you need to see? You could have taken a quarterback. Why are we doing this? We're running this really with Daniel Jones and Drew Lock. That's what we're going to do, Brian Dable, to try to save your job, eh? Okay. Outside of Malik Neighbors, not a ton of receiving talent. There's not really a great running back on the roster anymore. Brian Burns is cool, but I'm not exactly counting on a edge rusher to, win you 10 games. Like, I think the Giants are going to be putrid. I think this is going to be a tire fire season, and they are going to be in the Carson Beck sweepstakes with eyes towards next April of trying to get what they hope to be their next franchise quarterback. Because right now they don't have one on the roster. Could this be it for Brian Dable? Could it be it for Joe Shen? Could it be it for both of them? I don't know. But right now, it's a very grim outlook for me, at least for the Giants.
I think it's hard to give them really any kudos for anything right now. And we can sit here and say like the same thing we've been saying of like, oh, well, we'll see. I feel like this is a team where like you've seen what you needed to see already from them, because not much has really changed. I was pulling up the depth chart here. You're right. There's not much going on at the moment for the Giants. And honestly, I think their one hope at this point is that, maybe they do get some higher round draft picks next season. I was hoping that in the offseason they would do a little bit more. I really was, because you needed to. And I also had forgotten Daniel Jones coming off of an injury as well. He's listed as questionable now. So that plays a factor. I mean, when you have a quarterback that's getting paid just as much as Dak Prescott, and we don't have to get into that.
That's hilarious, by the way.
It's so wild. It's so wild. He needs to be performing. And honestly, I just don't know what he's going to look like coming off of injury. It doesn't look good for them. Yikes. I feel bad. I really do. I'm looking at this depth chart and there's not much going on. Kayvon Thibodeau, that's another name.
Like Kayvon Thibodeau and Brian Burns like on the same defensive line. That's neat.
But they can't do it alone.
Yeah, I was gonna say none of them can throw the ball from what I've seen. I don't think either of them are lining up under center. So like,
right.
Tell me how good your quarterback is, and I'll tell you how far you can go. And right now, like the Giants have it's Drew Lock or Daniel Jones. Hey, good luck with that. Good luck. Or Tommy DeVito. No. I don't care how much of a Debbie Downer I sound like. If I hear one more goddamn thing about Tommy DeVito, I'm going to launch a brick through my TV. I am so tired of that. I think that the Giants are going to be bad. Again, I don't know if it's gonna cost Brian Dable and Joe Shen their jobs, because like we know that Brian Dable is a good offensive mind and what he can do with capable quarterbacks. But I mean, if they're 2-15, 3-14, it would be hard to reason with bringing them back. But you could also point to the fact that they had Daniel Jones, but the rebuttal to that is, why didn't they get rid of Daniel Jones? So I really think that there's certainly jobs on the line for the Giants this coming off season. And I don't know that, I mean, we talk about Mike Vrabel, that could be a spot that's going to be giving him calls. We talk about Ben Johnson, that could be a spot that's going to be giving him calls. Like we're going to find out. And if you're the Giants and you go into 2025 with, Ben Johnson and Carson Beck, hey, your outlook is a lot brighter than it is right now with Daniel Jones and Drew Lock. So, maybe this is a blessing in disguise that needs to happen for them.
Man, and it's an ACL tear. I had forgotten what injury he was struggling with. Typically, when you see players coming back from an ACL tear, it takes about a year, honestly, for them to really be able to do what they need to do again and create that muscle memory. And we've seen it time and time again. We've seen it. And even going back to the Cowboys, there's so many players coming off of ACL tears that might take a while to amp up. And so for Daniel Jones, being mobile wasn't very much his strong suit before. It's probably not going to be again coming off of an ACL tear this season. So,
I mean, for Jones, I'd say that like being able to like move around was one of the few things that he had in his back pocket. Like being, the sneaky. I mean,
it's there, but is it utilized well? That's. It depends who he's going up against. I will say.
There was the I can't remember, was it a playoff game against Minnesota or was it the regular season game against Minnesota? He had like, they never left like a spy on him or whatever. So like, if his first read wasn't there, he was taking off for 11 yards at a time and finished the game with like 115 rushing yards or something like that.
I just don't. Coming off of an ACL tear.
That is the big worry.
It happened early enough that. Maybe by the time the season comes, he doesn't play any preseason games, he could be better off. I just think it's going to take at least like the first half of the season for him to feel out what he can and can't do. And that's worrisome.
Yeah. And look, if you're going into training camp with a battle of Daniel Jones and Drew Lock, like I think you kind of know how high your ceiling is, and it's not very high. Wouldn't shock me if Drew Lock is just the starter, like from week 1 on, and that's who they roll with. And we'll see. But I really just don't have too many expectations for the Giants other than, you got Malik Neighbors. That's pretty cool. Maybe Brian Burns and Kayvon Thibodeau will have respectable seasons, but that offense it's going to be a rough watch. But so if you had to, on May 20th, give me a 1 through 4 of the NFC East, what does it look like in your mind?
I am going to do the predictable thing here. I'm going to say Cowboys 1, Eagles 2, Washington 3, Giants 4. And I'm only giving the Cowboys the benefit of the doubt here because I personally feel the shift after that playoff loss. And you can say that every year, right? Like, oh, they understand their loss. No, like this feels different. It feels like there's a sense of urgency here because guess what? There's jobs actually on the line here. You have your franchise quarterback's job on the line potentially at this point because no deal has been made. Your head coach and, Zim's on a 1-year deal. You could either try to push through past that threshold this year or have a complete revamp that could take years to get back to this position with whoever ends up in those positions, right? So I think there is a sense of urgency because they have no choice anymore. They have to win. They have to go beyond, and they have to get to at least an NFC championship, at least at this point, to even be considered, the threat that they've been made out to be. So I'm going to say Cowboys won, but the Eagles not far behind. Like if I could do like a tie for 1-1 and then 3-4, I would. But like I said, I don't count out the Eagles. I just think Kellen Moore might mess with the offense a little bit in not the most positive of ways. So that's why I put the Eagles second. And then obviously I talked about Dan. And then, we don't have to talk about the Giants anymore. We know.
Sure. Great stuff all around. Just Navarro's, what have you got coming that you want to plug real quick in terms of work related things?
Oh, always working. For now, we're still Girls Talk, Boys Talk is every Thursday on DallasCowboys.com at 10 a.m. Central Time. So we're still doing that in our off-season schedule, and then that'll change after that, after we have our little hiatus pre-training camp. So we'll let you guys know what that schedule is. I did go back into my writing era for a little while, so you can catch me on Athlon Sports. There's some articles already there, and I'm going to be doing that right after this. So, I'm just still covering the Cowboys. I'm there, and I love you guys, and I appreciate you for having me on today. It's been so fun.
Absolutely. Are you going to be making the trip to Pittsburgh when they come to face the Steelers this year?
You know what? I've actually never been to Pittsburgh, so I would love to. I've never been. Can you believe that?
It's a good town. I enjoy it here. Yeah. So you can come. I'll get you a Permani sandwich. It'll be a great time.
Ooh, what is that?
Permani Brothers is like the staple restaurant of Pittsburgh. Yeah.
Oh, I'm gonna Google that because I'm a little hungry, so that didn't really help. But I love that. And you know what? If you ever come to Dallas, we have to get you some good barbecue because there's some very good spots over here. And being from New Mexico, I'm not a big Tex-Mex gal, so I'll see you in the terms of barbecue because Tex-Mex is not my favorite. So something good to come up here.
Consider it done. Justin Navarro, appreciate you joining me, and we'll see what happens with the Dallas Cowboys this year, and we'll see if we'll have you back on especially if they're on a hot streak. But I appreciate you hopping on with me.
Sure.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for tuning into the Pump Fake. See you soon as we continue making our roundtable around the NFL divisions.